I woke up to silence that felt too heavy. My heart sank the moment I realized something was wrong. While I slept, my own son and his wife had gone into my room. They had taken my card. My blood froze when I realized they had even whispered my PIN, thinking I would never know. And yet, as I lay there fully awake and listening, all I could do was smile. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. By the end of this story, you will see exactly how betrayal can turn into the sweetest revenge. My name is Margaret, and I am 52 years old. I live alone in a small, sunlit house on the edge of town, the kind of place where neighbors wave politely but do not linger. My life had been quiet, predictable, and comfortable. I raised my son Daniel on my own after his father passed when he was young. Daniel is 28 now, married to Emily, a woman I welcomed into our family with open arms. At first, I believed Emily was kind, thoughtful, and respectful. I wanted nothing more than to see my son happy. I remember the first time I noticed something off. Missing item here, a bill paid late there. At first, I brushed it off as carelessness, telling myself everyone makes mistakes. But there was a growing pattern, subtle enough to ignore but constant enough to plant doubt. I watched Daniel and Emily interact in ways that made my stomach twist. The way they whispered behind closed doors, the little smiles they exchanged that I did not understand. Something was festering beneath the surface. The house smelled faintly of coffee and the lingering scent of rain from the previous night. I sat in my armchair, staring at the sun filtering through the blinds, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I could not. My instincts rarely failed me. There was a tension I could feel in my bones, a warning that the life I knew was quietly unraveling. I wanted to be blind to it. I wanted to believe they loved me, trusted me, and respected the home I had built. But trust, I was learning, is a fragile thing. Daniel came into the living room that morning, his movements casual, effortless, like a predator aware of its prey. Emily followed behind him, humming softly, her eyes flicking toward me for no reason I could identify. The hum grated on my nerves. It was too cheerful, too rehearsed. I could feel a cold knot form in my stomach as they approached, and I realized that today would not be ordinary. I would not forget the subtle shift in the air, the way shadows stretched across the room as if warning me of what was to come. I had given them my trust, my love, and they had accepted it with a casual arrogance I had not anticipated. I watched Daniel sit at the kitchen table, flipping through the mail. Emily leaned over him, whispering something I could not hear. My fingers itched to reach for the papers, to see what they were hiding. But I restrained myself, smiling politely, hiding the unease that churned in my chest. Later, I noticed my wallet was slightly out of place. My card was gone. I asked them casually, my voice light, even though my heart hammered. Daniel looked at me, startled for a moment, and then laughed nervously. Emily shrugged, pretending innocence. I let it pass. At that moment, I did not confront them. I sat back and let them think they had succeeded. I heard them whisper my PIN without realizing I was listening. A shiver ran down my spine, but I did not move. I did not react. They had no idea I knew everything. The quiet smile that spread across my face felt almost foreign. I was calm, but inside, a storm was gathering. I realized that love and patience had limits. I realized that betrayal had consequences. I realized that I could turn the tables, and when I did, they would understand exactly what they had awakened. The smallest theft had become the spark for something much larger. I would not let this go. Not this time. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that like button and subscribe. Today, you will witness a story of ultimate justice, where patience and planning turn a stolen moment into a triumph no one saw coming. The days that followed were worse than I had anticipated. Every small interaction with Daniel and Emily carried a subtle edge, a quiet arrogance that set my nerves on fire. I noticed the way they walked through my home, careless and entitled, as if every object and every inch of space belonged to them. The soft thud of their shoes on the hardwood echoed in my chest, a constant reminder that my sanctuary had been violated. I watched them leave empty glasses on the counter, crumbs scattered on the floor, bills ignored. Every little act was a tiny dagger, and I felt the sting more sharply than I wanted to admit. Daniel began borrowing money without asking, always with a story that sounded urgent, but vague enough to avoid explanation. Emily would smile at me while he did it, a conspiratorial glint in her eyes that made my blood boil. I reminded myself to stay calm, to remain measured, but the frustration simmered just below the surface. I could see them planning, taking liberties, testing boundaries. And every time I confronted them, they apologized with false sweetness, promising to do better. But I knew better. The pattern was unmistakable. One afternoon, I noticed the car keys were missing. I asked Daniel casually, as if I expected an innocent explanation. He hesitated, glanced at Emily, and muttered something about needing to run an errand. Their whispers carried a tone I had come to recognize, a mixture of mischief and fear that I had noticed before. The unease that gripped me then was familiar. I realized they had grown bold, believing I was oblivious, believing they could manipulate me without consequence. They were wrong. There were moments when I caught Emily taking small items from my kitchen or bedroom, things I had thought insignificant until I realized they had a pattern. The quiet humiliation of being disrespected in my own home gnawed at me. I could feel my pulse quicken when I saw them exchanging subtle nods. Their private jokes at my expense was not just theft anymore. It was control, a creeping invasion of the life I had built. And still, I did not confront them. I watched, listened, and cataloged everything, letting their arrogance become the rope they would one day hang themselves with. I began noticing the way they flinched whenever my eyes lingered too long on them. The way their laughter sounded forced when I entered a room. That knowledge gave me a perverse satisfaction. They thought they were untouchable within my own walls. But I was learning patience. I was learning strategy. Every petty theft, every disrespectful glance, every stolen moment was becoming part of a larger puzzle. A puzzle that they had unknowingly handed to me, piece by piece. Late at night, I would lie awake, listening to the soft creak of the stairs as they moved through the house. My thoughts were alive with plans I would not yet act upon, schemes that required timing, precision, and subtlety. I felt the power shifting. They were so focused on exploiting me that they had forgotten I had eyes and ears and a mind sharper than they imagined. Every small betrayal they committed only fueled my resolve. And so the tension built layer by layer, each slight and deceit stacking upon the last. The quiet smile I had worn when I first heard my pin was now permanent, a shield of patience over a growing storm. I knew the moment would come when I would no longer observe silently, when every ounce of cunning and foresight would be unleashed. Daniel and Emily had taken liberties, underestimated me, and I had waited for the perfect moment. That moment was drawing nearer with each passing day. The morning sunlight did not bring warmth that day. Instead, it cut through the blinds in sharp lines, as if the world itself was highlighting the fault lines in my home. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold, and I felt the weight of every small betrayal pressing down on me at once. Daniel and Emily had crossed a line, and I realized in that moment that patience had limits. My heart was steady, but beneath it a current of fury surged, a force I had buried beneath years of love and tolerance. I remembered the stolen card, the whispered pin, the casual way they assumed I would never notice. I remembered Emily laughing softly as she moved things from their rightful place, and Daniel shrugging as if nothing mattered. Their arrogance had become a challenge, a dare. And I realized I could not continue living under the illusion that their respect was something I could coax from them. I had to reclaim control, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with precision. I closed my eyes and replayed every act of disrespect, every subtle theft. Each moment had a rhythm, a pattern, a weakness waiting to be exploited. Their confidence was their flaw. They believed I was naive, that love had rendered me blind, that my tolerance was weakness. And for the first time in years, I embraced the thought that I could turn their hubris against them. A slow, deliberate smile crept across my face, the kind of smile that comes when someone realizes they hold the advantage without revealing it. I thought about the way Emily's eyes darted when she believed no one was watching. I remembered Daniel's hesitation when asked a simple question. I cataloged these moments in my mind like pieces of a map. Every whisper, every glance, every laugh at my expense became a clue, a tool, a step in the strategy I was about to create. I would not act impulsively. That was what made their plan effective. In their mind, they acted without foresight. I would do the opposite. I would wait, I would observe, and I would strike when they least expected it. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside me. Rain tapped against the windows in irregular rhythms. Wind rattled the frames, and I felt the electricity of anticipation in the air. I imagined scenarios, each more satisfying than the last. I imagined their faces when the consequences of their arrogance became impossible to ignore. I imagined the disbelief, the humiliation, the realization that they had underestimated me. My chest tightened with a mixture of excitement and calm resolve. I was no longer a passive observer. I was the architect of justice. I began mentally drafting the plan, step by step. It would require patience, timing, and subtlety. I had to lure them into overconfidence, encourage their mistakes, and be ready to capitalize on every misstep. Every act of disrespect had taught me something. Every small theft had built a framework for the trap I was designing. I would not be reckless. I would not rush. But I would act with precision. And when I did, they would understand the full weight of their betrayal. By the time the rain stopped and the sun broke through the clouds again, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would be the same. Daniel and Emily had awakened a side of me they had never seen. I had waited, watched, and collected evidence in the form of patterns and behavior. Now I would take what they thought they had stolen and turn it into a lesson they would never forget. The quiet storm in my mind had become a blueprint. I was ready. I began quietly, with movements so small they would never draw suspicion. The house had a rhythm, and I had lived in it long enough to know when silence was safest. Early mornings were mine. The air felt cooler, heavier, like it was holding secrets. I took out my phone and adjusted the settings on my bank account, turning on instant transaction alerts. My fingers were steady, but my heart thumped slowly, deliberately, like a countdown. Every notification would become a witness. I placed my wallet back in the same spot where it always rested, slightly visible, slightly tempting. I made sure my purse was unzipped just enough to look careless. Not careless enough to appear staged, but careless enough to whisper opportunity. Then I waited. Waiting was not weakness anymore. It was strategy. That evening, I cooked dinner as usual. The smell of spices filled the kitchen, warm and inviting, disguising the tension coiled inside me. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. Emily leaned against the counter, her eyes drifting toward my purse every few seconds. I pretended not to notice. I stirred the pot slowly, letting the spoon scrape against the sides just loud enough to mask the soft rustle of movement behind me. Later that night, when the house grew quiet, I lay in my bed with my eyes closed and my senses wide open. The floor creaked faintly outside my door. My breath remained slow and deep. I heard whispers, then silence, then the barely audible sound of fabric shifting. My phone vibrated under my pillow once. Then again, my pulse raced, but I did not move. The trap had been sprung. The next morning, I checked my messages. There it was. A transaction notification, then another. My lips curved into a small, controlled smile. They had taken the bait. I documented everything. Screenshots neatly stored, timestamps clear, amounts precise. Each detail felt like a brick laid into the foundation of their downfall. I began tightening the net. I mentioned casually that I had been thinking about changing banks because of security concerns. Emily stiffened slightly. Daniel avoided my eyes. That told me everything. Fear had entered the room, but they had no idea how deep it would go. Over the next few days, I continued my performance. I acted distracted. I left my purse unattended for brief moments. Okay? I pretended to misplace things. Every move was calculated. Every mistake was deliberate. Each time, my phone vibrated. It's time. I recorded it. Each time, my resolve hardened. There was a moment when Emily looked at me, her expression sharp with suspicion. My heart skipped. I met her gaze calmly and smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, just enough to confuse her. That hesitation was all I needed. They were no longer confident. They were cautious. And cautious people make bigger mistakes. I scheduled a family meeting under the pretense of discussing finances and household responsibilities. I chose a late afternoon when sunlight poured through the windows and left nowhere to hide. I prepared a folder, printed statements, screenshots, time logs. The evidence lay neatly organized like a courtroom exhibit. When they sat across from me, I could feel the tension vibrating in the air. Daniel fidgeted. Emily crossed her arms too tightly. I spoke softly, asking simple questions. Their answers came quickly, rehearsed, fragile. Each lie sounded thinner than the last. Then I slid the folder across the table. The sound of paper against wood felt louder than thunder. I watched their faces change. Confusion, shock, fear. The room grew heavy with silence. This was no outburst, no screaming, no chaos. This was precision. This was control. Every step I had taken led to this moment. They had believed they were stealing quietly. They had believed I was unaware. They had believed love made me powerless. And now, they were about to understand that patience, when sharpened by betrayal, becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. I watched them slowly flip through the folder, their eyes widening with each page. Daniel's hand trembled as he held the printouts, the numbers and timestamps sinking in. Emily's jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw fear, raw and unfiltered, reflected in her eyes. I did not speak for a long moment. I let the silence stretch, let it press down on them like a weight they could not escape. Every breath they took was a reminder of their arrogance, their blind assumption that I was naive, powerless, and unaware. Then Daniel spoke, his voice cracking slightly. I do not understand. I thought you would not notice. Must be a mistake. His eyes darted to Emily, pleading silently for an explanation he knew she could not give. I tilted my head slowly, my gaze steady, and let the corners of my mouth lift in a small, deliberate smile. There is no mistake, I said. My voice was calm, measured, but it carried a weight that made the room tremble. I noticed everything, every transaction, every whisper of the pin, every small theft, every disrespectful glance. I documented it all. Emily's face went pale, and she could not meet my eyes. The confidence she had worn like armor had evaporated. She tried to speak, tried to spin a story, but the words faltered in her throat. I watched her panic, subtle at first, then overt as she realized the trap had been designed too perfectly. My pulse was steady, but inside I felt a rush of vindication so intense it made my chest ache. I had waited, I had observed, and now justice was unavoidable. I slid the folder closer to them. The papers seemed heavier than they actually were, each one a silent hammer. Every detail is here, I said, my tone deliberate, almost serene. You thought you could exploit my trust? You thought I would remain blind, powerless, and forgiving. You were wrong. This ends now. I paused, letting the words sink, letting them feel the magnitude of their miscalculation. Daniel's hands shook violently, his lips pressed together as if biting back words. Emily's fingers curled around the edge of the table, knuckles white, her mind racing for an escape that did not exist. I could see their guilt, their shame, and their disbelief converging into a tangible weight between us. The room felt smaller, every shadow stretching longer, every ray of sunlight cutting sharper, highlighting the difference between predator and prey. Finally, Daniel whispered, I did not think. We did not mean to. I raised a hand, cutting him off before the excuses could form. Intentions do not erase consequences. Respect does not erase theft. Trust does not erase lies. You were warned in subtle ways every single day, and still you pushed. And now you must face what follows from that choice. I felt the tension leave my shoulders in a rush, like air escaping a balloon. Relief washed over me, sharp and sweet. Every tightened muscle, every sleepless night, every moment of silent observation had led to this. Triumph surged through me, steady, unyielding. Validation settled in my chest. I had been underestimated, disrespected, and tested. And now the power was mine. They slumped slightly in their chairs, broken not physically, but in the exact way they had never expected, exposed, humiliated, powerless. I allowed myself a final, slow breath, feeling the storm inside me settle into calm certainty. The injustice that had haunted me for months had been met with precision. Every whisper, every glance, every theft had been accounted for. And the lesson they would carry forward was simple. Never underestimate the person they have wronged. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. My heart, once tight with fury and restraint, now beat evenly, steady and strong. I had taken what they had tried to steal from me, dignity, control, and respect, and reclaimed it fully. The quiet room was filled only with the sound of our breathing, the weight of realization heavy in the air. Justice had been served. After the confrontation, the house felt different. Lighter, quieter, but charged with the echoes of the storm we had just survived. I walked through the room slowly, touching the furniture, listening to the small creaks of the floorboards, and realizing how much space I had reclaimed, not just physically, but emotionally. The fear, the tension, the subtle dread that had followed me like a shadow for months was gone. In its place was clarity, a sharp understanding that patience, observation, and strategy were as powerful as any confrontation. I reflected on Daniel and Emily. They had believed love and familiarity made me powerless, that kindness could be exploited without consequence. They had forgotten that respect is earned, not given, and that betrayal carries its own weight. Watching their faces that day, I saw how arrogance blinds people. They had assumed I would forgive easily. That silence meant submission. In truth, silence had been my ally, my way of gathering strength, understanding patterns, and preparing for the moment when the scales would finally tip in my favor. Karma is not instantaneous. It does not strike in dramatic flashes like in the movies. It works quietly, invisibly, until a person finds themselves facing the consequences of every choice they made. Daniel and Emily experienced that truth fully, in ways they had never expected. I learned something important too. Patience does not weaken resolve. Waiting, observing, and letting people reveal themselves can be the most potent form of power. Justice does not require rage. It requires timing, focus, and the wisdom to act when the moment is perfect. I also realized the importance of self-respect. For too long, I had ignored the small violations, telling myself love justified tolerance. I thought patience and forgiveness were always virtues. But boundaries exist for a reason, and failing to enforce them allows others to take liberties. I had learned that lesson the hard way, through subtle thefts, whispered secrets, and casual disregard. But I emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in my ability to protect what is mine, not just objects, but dignity, peace, and control over my own life. As I sit in my living room now, sunlight spilling over the hardwood floors, I feel a sense of completion. The fear and frustration that had once weighed heavily on me have been replaced by quiet satisfaction. The house, once invaded by arrogance and disrespect, now belongs fully to me again. I can breathe, I can think. I can smile without restraint. The ordeal taught me that sometimes justice is not about punishment alone. It is about reclaiming your life, restoring balance, and reminding those who underestimated you that every action has consequences. life moves on. Daniel and Emily will move on to carrying the memory of their miscalculation. I have learned to trust more cautiously, to observe more carefully, and to value patience as much as action. Betrayal is painful, but it can also teach resilience, foresight, and the power that comes from self-possession. I am stronger than I realized, and I know now that standing firm, quietly, and strategically can be far more effective than shouting or forcing confrontation. The story is over, but the lessons remain. Patience is a weapon. Observation is power. Respect is never optional. Trust is precious. And most importantly, betrayal does not define us. It reveals who we are when we choose how to respond. I chose strategy, precision, and dignity. That choice changed everything. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button. Share in the comments the moment when patience and strategy helped you reclaim control in your own life. Subscribe for more gripping tales of betrayal, justice, and emotional triumph. Remember, the strongest power often comes from calm, calculated action, and the lessons we learn from those who underestimate us.